Hello and welcome to the first of these two short reflections on godly silence. I wonder if you've noticed how quiet the world is. Taking the bus to Tesco on Thursday, the roads were strangely empty, and apart from all the applause at 8 o'clock on Thursday evening, our neighbourhood is hushed in this time of pandemic. And so it might seem is God. I'm sure there are many who wonder at this apparent divine silence in the midst of this pandemic and consider that it confirms there is no such thing as God. Or, if there is, well, God is certainly not good. Otherwise, he would not have done, or he would have done something, a view which many embraced, for example, in the face of the horrors of past Holocausts. Many have tried to understand why God seemed absent when most needed by his people. Some have realized that having created humankind in freedom, God cannot then step in and interfere. God has to remain hidden. Others say that to deny God in the face of tragedy would compound the nature of evil. Whilst many realize that to take God out of the equation simply limits the resources we have to cope with such situations. And some, looking at how suffering is dealt with in, for example, the book of Job, realize it's right to cry out in anger, whilst not letting that become overwhelming. Something that we see also in the way that Christ lived through his passion, which we'll shortly be recalling during Holy Week. They look at the events of that week and realize God is there in the midst of the pain and the suffering, right there, through the agony of crucifixion, when even Christ cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" But in the end, of course, he commended himself into the hands of his Father. There's a mystery to suffering which we can never fully understand. But one thing is clear. The generational upheavals societies experience due to war or disease reveal what lies within, both the bad and the good. Without such appalling tragedies, would we ever know what lay in the depths of our humanity? I was born a year after the end of the Second World War, and for a long time knew nothing of its horrors. My generation were told, "You've never had it so good." And that for many was, of course, correct. Occasionally, some might have suffered from disasters, floods, storms, but it was people living in other countries remote from ours who experienced war, famine, and infectious epidemics. And I, for one, wondered at people who in such places were able still to proclaim their faith in God, who said, Inshallah, it is God's will. Could disaster be God's will? Is that what they meant? As part of a generation who believed that widespread disease had been medically eliminated and that any sickness could be cured by a visit to the doctor, the thought that pain and suffering were the context of belief staggered and suggested a cruel God. Cruel God was the cause. It is God's will. Now, for a while, the West, like the rest of the world, is again subject to those twins of pain and suffering. And in it all, God seems to be silent. For some time, we in these so-called advanced societies haven't needed God. We're all atheists now, one BBC News presenter exclaimed recently. Only in emergencies God can be privately addressed, as some turn to this ancient mystery for solace. But we no longer need a supernatural magician to solve our needs. We expect them to be answered immediately at the press of a button, and forget the long, patient, creative, and sometimes painful ways in which those needs are answered. Whatever lies beyond our immediate human comfort zone isn't of great interest to many, who are satisfied by spending hours on their iPhone, visits to the gym, holidays in far-flung places, and Saturdays watching sport. Not, of course, that there's anything wrong with any of those taken in moderation. But life, for many, has lost any sense of mystery and is merely something which ought to give us what we want when we want it. And now, when that life has suddenly ended for a while and may not return for some, there can be feelings of dread, disorientation, and profound confusion, and yes, even anger. Our landscape has changed, and we're going through a traumatic spiritual shift. Yet still, some say God is there. God is present in the many small and great acts of kindness and compassion, of selfless service and outreach, as far as possible. God is still there in the wonder and mystery of the rest of creation, which at times like this we need to contemplate. And God is there in silence, as God has always been. There for us in the same way he was when another nation found itself in a wilderness, lost and confused, longing for what had been and tempted to complain. There long ago, when someone sat fearfully at the mouth of a desert cave and wondered at the sound of sheer silence. There when a man was driven into a desert for 40 days, tempted in despair, yet where in the silence of solitude he found himself. There when people flocked to the emptiness of the desert at the start of Christianity. There for those religious who embrace solitude and silence. There as we must fast from what we normally look to feed us. God is present in our hearts, a place to be avoided by some, rarely visited. When you're occupied with so much else, stillness and silence can be qualities we do not nurture. So let us pray. Penetrate my heart, O God, by the radiance of your glance. Because it's the person who befriends these two, solitude and silence, who can enter that holiest place. Might this be time then when our culture has the opportunity to discover its depths, when undistracted by noise and activity, we can see what we're capable of. And through all those acts of selfless generosity, when we have the opportunity of realizing what lies within in the silence of our hearts, to wonder at our being. No longer able to travel to far-flung places, we suddenly have the chance of exploring our own hidden soul. But we need those who've traveled that way further into the depths of the heart, the center of our being, to guide us on the way. Those who have realized that prayer is more than just asking for things, it's a way of heart speaking to heart. That's the subject for tomorrow evening at the same time, when I'll also offer some reflections on the connection between silence and prayer. In the meantime, be silent, still, aware, for there within your heart, the Spirit is at prayer. Open and find heart wisdom, Christ.